Hello and welcome to season 3, episode 7 of the Dating Podcast. Ravi, how are you doing?
Surviving. I think that is the best place to be right now, right? So you want to be surviving.
Absolutely. It's we're into our. People keep counting weeks down, but normally you only count down when you know how many weeks you're going to be in lockdown, right? So we currently don't know that. So yeah, it's a very interesting time. Very interesting time.
I think it's more interesting for those of us like me who I live alone.
Okay.
Last time I had familiar human contact was about a month ago. So I think more than a month actually, because I think it was March 10th.
I hadn't thought of that. I mean, I live with my girlfriend and a dog, so being lonely in both senses, not having a pet or even being able to socialize with family, that's a big one.
Yeah, for sure. I think what's interesting is like you still get the social exhaustion, but I think it's been replaced by Zoom or webinar or just virtual social exhaustion.
Yeah, exactly. That's still there. You kind of have to adapt to it as we kind of go through the phases, right? It feels like we go through different phases of this lockdown. First one is realization, second one is reality, and then the third one is frustration.
I guess routine comes next, right? It just becomes normal.
Right.
I think that's what I'm slowly getting to, is sort of like, well, this is my day now, right? Like this is I get up, I have breakfast, I decide if I'm going to run now or if I'm going to run in the evening.
Later.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then that's about it. But it's good. Luckily enough, we've been having some wonderful weather as well to peer out from inside.
Absolutely. And I guess we want to try and bring a ray of positivity here.
Of course,
we've pushed out the last 2 episodes, so if you haven't caught those out, go and catch those. Go have a listen. They are related to coronavirus, but they're looking at sort of different aspects of it. So definitely episodes to check out. As we go into this current phase, an interesting topic came up in the last couple of weeks, focused around contact tracing, and basically this idea that in order to get control of this virus, what we have to do is develop a vaccine and a test. But then, because those take time, and you want to try and allow society to kind of normalize in some sort of new way, as in, let people go back to work, but obviously not in the sort of typical circumstances. We all cram into sardine cans on a train. But, when there's a breakout, be able to track where that breakout's happening. So this is the concept of contact tracing.
Yeah.
And it sounds kind of very difficult. I think the old way of doing that is you simply ask the person, where have you been? Who have you spent time around? And typically you have to spend a meaningful amount of time with someone for it to actually count, as it were.
However, to quote House, Dr. Gregory House from the show House, everybody lies, right? Like you can't really trust people too much. So this is why the idea of contact tracing is coming about. I think that
exactly.
The sort of purpose of this episode is to talk a bit about that, right? So there's a couple of different providers who are building out an application for contact tracing, and I think the mechanism for doing this is mobile phones, given that we all largely have a smartphone, and this is the best way of tracking people, as it were. So Apple and Google are working together, allegedly, to build out a similar app for both the App Store and the Google Play Store. There's a bunch of the Vergecast, for example, are doing weekly podcasts, and they've talked about this in those as well. But for me, this sparked. We talked about this in the last episode. A couple of the legislation that comes through during this time is kind of like when you've got a state of emergency after a terrorist attack. You can put through legislation to put an app on everyone's phone to know where they are and who they've been in contact with. However, what you really want is, do you trust that person, the government, or the company more? And I think that's why we want to talk a bit about digital identity today, and how technology really impacts and how we can use it for situations like this. But sort of things we need to be aware of, and sort of the liberties you want to share. Like on the Vergecast, there was one of the 3 hosts. One of them was heavily talking about, this is how they get you, man. This is how they start taking away your freedom in very American terms.
Exactly. I mean, I think Americans refer to terrorism laws, which were brought in immediately after 9/11. In fact, they were sworn in hours after 9/11.
Watch the film Vice. What a film that is.
They've stayed in place up until now. They were never temporary rules. They've just basically become permanent rules. And so it's probably worth just very briefly explaining what contact tracing is. So,
Go for it.
In a technological sense, so Apple and Google have basically formed a partnership Tim Cook and Sundar Pichai, the Google CEO, Tim Cook, Apple CEO, they basically got together and they're developing two things. Now, the first implementation is very simple. It's essentially an API. This is an interface that allows companies like the NHS, or in America, the different healthcare system providers, to basically hook into the phone's native operating system to access information that's stored in the Bluetooth chip. And so what's going to happen is that the Bluetooth chip is essentially going to be almost broadcasting itself out to people. By the way, this is opt-in, so you actually have to opt in for this capability in the app of the provider. And so you can broadcast your Bluetooth details. And what other phones will do is they'll basically be listening into that. And if you're around someone for, let's say, 15 to 20 minutes, it will actually remember who you are around using that Bluetooth sort of broadcast signal. So let's say I'm Tim, you're Ravi, we're in the same room. Your phone is pinging my phone.
Yep.
If they do that for 20 minutes, your phone logs that it was near mine, and that's stored in the phone for 14 days. Now, if you imagine this over the 14-day period, let's say 3 weeks later, I then get coronavirus. Well, it's possible for me to say in an app that I have coronavirus, and that will immediately notify the healthcare providers of all the other devices that I've spent a meaningful amount of time around. And then that will allow the government and healthcare providers to very quickly trace people they should be tracing to help control the lockdown.
So immediately in my head, this conjures the. So I've been watching the Batman, the Christopher Nolan Batmans recently, just because right. I maintain to this day that Batman Begins is by far and away the best film of the three. But yeah, so in the Dark Knight, in order to find the Joker, what Batman does is shows this technology he has of turning everyone's cell phone, as they call it in America, into a receiver. So you're getting almost a sonar radar sort of like feel to map the entire city to find where the Joker is in order to stop him blowing up two boats. Now, for me, that's what this sounds like, right? I mean, the thing to add here is contact tracing as a concept, as in the technology that does this, the Bluetooth pinging, happens already. I think we talked about this in the last episode, that in order to get good Wi-Fi or, sharing contacts, your Bluetooth is always on for a reason nowadays, right? So before, you used to turn off your Bluetooth because you knew the assumption was that it used up power. Now your Bluetooth is always on because it has to be. In order for it to find out where you are and triangulate your position on Google Maps when there's no signal, Bluetooth helps do that, right? It sort of gives you a rough idea of where you are based on that circle. Wi-Fi, finding out where you are and the Wi-Fi hotspots nearby. If you have a smartwatch or a smart device, the Bluetooth is what communicates with that. The second you turn off Bluetooth, your wearables become redundant. You're not getting a good location on your on where you are and all these different things. So it's quite interesting to think about that as a concept. So when we were talking about this earlier, I remember my boss talking about the only way forward is having some sort of passport. So when you go to Kenya, for example, or any of that area, you have to have the yellow fever passport to say you've been vaccinated. So similarly, I feel like this is where we're going to get to. You're going to have a badge or lanyard or passport on you to make sure. So, but in order to make sure you never forget that, you need to make sure that's on something that you will probably never forget, which is, your smartphone. So I think that's where the ideas come from. I think it's a very smart idea. However, you can see, my reaction is akin to Lucius Fox in The Dark Knight, which is kind of sick. It's like beautiful and elegant and works. However, it's also really, really creepy. Right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a really tough sort of
moral decision.
Yeah, it's almost a paradigm, isn't it? Because you've gone from this position where if you'd suggested anything like this in any other scenario, you wouldn't have gone near it with a barge pole. But we now live in a world where I think there's some surveys being done of the NHSX. So NHSX is the National Health Service Digital Transformation Unit. It's a really long name. It needs an acronym that's better than that.
That's why they have the X, Tim.
Well, the X stands for 4 things, apparently. So
it's algebra. It's simple algebra.
They surveyed 6,000 people. And apparently only 74% of users would actually be keen to install the contact tracing capability on their device, right? To opt into it. And, if you look at Singapore, the actual figure of those who actually, were willing to do that was 17%. So there's a wide gulf of cooperation there. And then the other thing is this kind of system only really works if it has really good coverage. Like you say 74%, well, that's a good ratio. Well, again, that still doesn't give you the full picture, right? Because it all depends on the locality of that sort of concentration. Let's say 74% and the majority of that is in London. It gives you poor visibility in other regional sort of geographical areas. So it's kind of challenged partly by the lack of participation. The system only works when everyone's in it together. But then also there's a flip side of that, which is trust. You're not going to have full participation if people don't trust that this kind of capability isn't going to go away once this is over. We're all happy to do it and comply, but people want to trust. And the two companies we're being asked to trust are two companies that, let's just say, don't have a great trust relationship with the public. Google for obvious reasons. Apple even more so if you look at their sort of more recent faux pas with battery life and all that kind of stuff. People inherently don't trust motives behind these companies.
But I think what's interesting is, you know, the Apple is still more trusted because they're so public about we're doing this to stop your privacy. Oh yeah, by the way, we're going to hide about how much battery life you've actually got. Right. So it's almost like like Huawei is a similar example, right? So they basically tell, oh yeah, we're doing exactly what every other mobile phone company is doing, which is collecting data on you. We're just telling you about it.
Right, exactly. And it's an interesting dilemma because you see what I was thinking in my mind. I was walking Toby before we had this podcast, and I was thinking in my mind, well,
Toby being your dog.
I should say Toby being. I really hope no one walks their kid or anyone like. Can only literally be my dog. I think in that context, right?
Unprecedented times.
Fair enough. I wasn't just going out on a walk for kicks. So no, I was thinking about it and I thought, well, you know, do you really need contact tracing to be able to figure out, you know, movements of people? Like, could you string together a series of companies that as a collective could actually do the same thing without you ever knowing? Okay. And Google is probably the closest company to that, if that makes sense. If Google and Apple were one company, my word, that would be a really scary prospect. It kind of highlights the importance of competition in a market. Because if that was just one company that was doing that, owned that entire sort of landscape, they already have that innate capability internally. I'm not saying they use it, but they already have that capability.
Right, so 98% of all smartphones are running on iOS or Android. So
Exactly. But then I thought, what about mobile phone providers, right? They have a pretty good, like your phone every 5 to 10 minutes is broadcasting its location back to the cell towers. And that cell tower information is used to triangulate a phone. Now, when the police need to, they can access that information and triangulate your location with an incredible accuracy. And that history goes back several months. It's not just like the here and now, it goes backwards. And so I always wondered, well, could you implement a contact tracing system whereby you could not necessarily be as accurate as I was in a room with Ravi, but you could say there's a coronavirus outbreak in your area. Everyone in this area stay at home for the next 2 weeks, right? And sort of restrict movement that way, because I find it really hard to believe that you're going to be able to successfully, get this contact tracing app to work. You need some sort of more broader system that is smart, but is smart in a way that isn't intrusive. And I almost think putting something on your phone is more intrusive than, you know, the government broadly being aware that you are in London on a particular day, right?
100%.
I think people would be more comfortable with government knowing you're in SE15 or SE13 on a particular day compared to you're in a room with Ravi in that particular day, right?
Absolutely. I think that's you're hitting the nail on the head there. For example, because, you know, the second you put something on someone's phone, you're just like, right, what are they looking at? No, they just don't want to. They want to know where you are based on your Bluetooth. Yeah. But I've just said this is my biggest bugbear with the Android store, right? Because in order to allow certain apps, you have to almost say accept all, or it's not going to install. Like including like voice, like was it the listen to your voice calls or access to your microphone? So why do you need access to my microphone?
You can't reject just a few. You have to accept all of it or none of it.
Exactly.
It's a very weird paradigm.
Whereas iOS has a bit more customization at that point, right? So you do have a bit more control. So yeah,
exactly.
I mean that's what's interesting to me. I think that's using the cell towers really does make sense. Now, if we talk about digital identity in general, right? So if you're linking this all to smartphones, you can get a very big brother because, you know, for example, more and more people year by year are adding their health information onto their phones. Okay, so I think for example, iOS has a great medical ID thing, so you can set it when you found someone, I don't know, come across someone that's unconscious, if you've got your phone on you and it's an iPhone, you can add in your medical ID with emergency contacts, some information that you can add in there as well. So that's all great, happy days. However, what if that information then is used for other things, for profiling? Now,
exactly.
Now, historically, the best person to speak to you to understand who you are in a like pseudo digital identity has been your banks, right? So we've talked about Experian in the past and the Mosaic codes that they have, but really these are the people that you have most of the information about you based on how you can get a good understanding of who someone is by their spending habits, by the things they register to with their bank account. All of these different things you can figure out based on their sort of credit history, etc. Right?
Exactly.
So,
and I think
sorry, just to finish my point, I think that what this really boils down to is, who do you trust? Do you trust a government, which can change based on party and agenda and all of this stuff, who are funded by, in the US, super PACs, and in the UK by unions, etc., and lobbying boards? Or do you trust a company who's driven by profits and by shareholders? Or do you trust a bank, again, who are also driven by profits and shareholders? And the most recent crisis before this one was caused by greedy banks and the abolishment of the Glass-Steagall Act that meant that you couldn't have savings and investments as two separate things. Two joint things.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing. Like, who do you trust the most out of this? Like, this is your menu of government, private company, tech company, or bank. Like, who's the best person to leave your PID information with? Well, I guess for most people, it's like, well, the bank already knows who I am. So,
right.
Do I just leave it there? Right? I feel like a bank in the scenario in front of you, bank and maybe tech companies have you already. So, at what degree do you want to control and give them more and more?
And this is the thing. Like, I've always felt that the word demographic and identity are sort of incorrectly interchangeable in typical sort of discussion, right? So when you look at
I guess I just did that, right?
Experian. Yeah, exactly. This is you walked into my trap. If I talk about Experian just as an example, right? What they actually know about you is your demographic. They don't know that you are Tim Nguyen and, well, actually they do, but they don't know that you they don't know that you what you do on weekends. They don't know necessarily what you just bought at Tesco yesterday, but they do know that you're the kind of person who's likely to go to Tesco. They do know that you're the kind of person who's likely to do certain things on a weekend based on your past behaviors. So they can't necessarily define you. That's your identity, but they can give you a demographic. And the demographic allows marketeers to target you in a broad sense that actually makes sense for businesses. The difference with identity is that it actually defines exactly who you are. It gives you a unique identification. It separates you from the other thousands of people that have the same demographic as you. So in a group of, let's say, 30,000 in a marketing campaign, my identity should be able to signify who I am. And that's the sort of next level of sort of information we're getting to now with the way online systems and digital systems work, because they all store information and log information. I think this is a big thing with VPNs. VPNs don't have logs. Logs are typically, track informations from servers, right? So server basically says, hey, I made an internet connection with Tom. Great. Okay, bye. Now, that is information that tracks who you are.
Yeah.
Now, if you're not storing that, then you have no logs on who you are, and therefore it is a fully private system. So this is how VPNs typically work. Now, if you go back to mobile phone companies in your bank, I've always had discussions with you about what is a bank in the modern day context. They used to stay.
Mate. I think that conversation is where we started the thing of we should just do a podcast. I think that was the conversation.
Exactly. And to save everyone a lot of time and debate, my view is always that banks have lost their way. They used to be about money. They used to be about storing your assets, right? Whether it was financial assets or personal assets, jewelry or whatever. Today, they basically should be pivoting to this new concept of storing your digital assets, right? Because you no longer need vaults. Cash is a disappearing concept. Your net worth is purely digital nowadays. And as we go on further and further, currency is being almost replaced with sort of your assets in sort of lots of interesting ways. And so their whole purpose should be about asset tracking, which is why they're really big on Bitcoins, right? Because it allows you to track assets in lots of different ways. That's the real value of a bank. And now if we go back to identity, that's where a bank really kind of can play a really big role. And that's where you see them going into things like health insurance, because that gets them closer and closer to kind of figuring out not just who exactly you are, but what kind of services you're likely to need at exactly when. This is what Monzo does really well, actually. They put the service right in front of you, right when you need it. They want to turn themselves into a marketplace for financial information, not just like a simple run off the mill bank.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's an interesting sort of we're at this junction without really realizing it. And contact tracing is one of these things that crosses a threshold without the discussion happening because we're too busy looking the other way, right? We're at this point where we're too busy paying attention to the health crisis, which is the right thing. But because we're looking the other way, this whole swathe of technologies is coming through. I doubt very much that this example of Google and Apple working together will be the last time it will happen, right? Suddenly, this crisis has created a situation where they can collaborate in a very open and transparent way about how something works. They can figure out how their two technologies can actually interoperate in that sense. And there's no doubt that this will create a benefit for both companies long term.
Agreed.
If at least just figuring out how to work with each other, right?
I think I mean, we talked a bit about the innovation step about and the opportunity here for technology in this space where it's almost accelerating people working remotely, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
But yeah, it's almost to use the I've got to be careful what I say here, but the love for the war analogies, right?
Right.
But war has always been a time for innovation, like penicillin, etc. So it could be a time where we start bringing in ideas of technology that may have otherwise not been considered. I think I mean, the digital identity extends, I think, a bit further into the tech and social media debate, right? So, for example,
right.
When there are cases of abuse and bullying online or racism, and people hide behind anonymity. There needs to be some sort of verification about who you are, etc. And I think this will grow. And I think if there then becomes a centralized system for this thing can never be centralized, right? Because you're talking about people's identities here,
right.
But in some cases, the idea of having one place to find or one authentic place to verify your identity, or many different ways, so you can choose your provider. That really will help that discussion as well, right? So the digital identity will not only give you benefit in terms of allowing you access to certain services, but think about like prevention of fraud, of online crime,
right.
Changing the way we work with things that are time consuming or might seem repetitive, access to goods and services that are age restricted, or even things you're entitled to because there's a better understanding of who you are. The chances that you're frauding a government system, and of course government systems are the last to be updated to the modern world. Things like paying tax should be so much easier than they are, right? Or like
imagine like a fully automated tax and benefit system where you don't need to do anything, right? You just live your life.
It's fully optimized, right?
And if you have an income, great, the tax comes out of that. If you don't, you're unemployed. You don't have to notify someone you're unemployed. The system knows that. And if you want to go out and look for a job and you get employed, it just all works together. At the moment, there's a lot of things we do, which is just we are kind of the hamsters in the wheel, right?
Yeah. Like think about the gig economy, right? So the gig economy could be that you're getting $20 this week, £20 next week, and then 6,000 in the 3 weeks that's been like a backdated thing. Right now, you have to do all these things to make sure that they go right into the correct system. Some people might be paying you via PayPal because it's easier, etc., etc. So, proving identity can suddenly become simple, secure, and private. So I sound like some sort of advert for it now, right? But there are upsides to this. There are things where you can start building out who you are, and as long as there's some sort of multi-factor authentication piece or fingerprinting system and encryption enabled in these systems, then it works. Otherwise, but again, you come back to the same point: like, who do you trust? Who do you trust in this?
Exactly.
Who do you trust in these scenarios?
Yeah. really, really tough. I think the one aspect that I think we kind of seek solace in is that I'm actually glad that it's Apple and Google doing this. Does that make sense? Because if you look at China, where the government did this instead, right? And when the government does this, it's got a completely different level of sort of connotation. Like in many ways, I'm glad two unrelated companies who have a healthy competition have come together to do this, because it's a healthy reason for them to break apart and remove that capability from their devices. Whereas a government, well, given how long it's taking to do very basic things like PPE and resources and getting people income that have been furloughed or unemployed, just think how long it would take to unwind something like this if the government implemented it, right? At least I know that Apple can switch off the feature on my iPhone as soon as this is all over, right? They give the capability to the NHS. As soon as this is all over, I have a fairly confident stance that Apple will switch that feature off. And if they don't, I have a choice as a customer to go to a platform.
Right, so like a PR disaster for Apple is absolute trash because they've
right.
versus a PR disaster for a government. Like the government is
which is an election.
The government is a PR disaster.
It's called an election, mate.
Yeah.
Look at Brexit. That's all that happens, and these things are short-termist. They're 3-4 years. Companies like Apple and Google have the capability to achieve things that governments can't, because they have had the leaders in those positions for decades almost. Yeah. These people have been working in that company with the same mission and aim. And so they're doing things that, frankly, government should have this capability. It shouldn't be Apple and Google, sourcing masks, for goodness sakes, right? Like, this is the kind of thing that the government should be doing. It shouldn't have to be Apple pulling strings in its supply chain.
Just on that, again, we're very close to, especially the last 2 episodes, turning into a policy and government episode, but like a podcast rather. But I think the other thing is thinking about this as a government as a business sense, which is how difficult it is to get a government contract and become an approved supplier of services and goods for a government agency, be that a council, be that the health authority. There are quick and easy solutions, but I think private businesses are able to make those decisions faster without due process. And I think, again, like I said, I feel like this is a great time to hide bad news. This is a great time to slide something under the door that might have otherwise been forgotten. But yeah, you have to think about the due process. So yes, it's very easy to say, like, they should be just super simple, just to be like, yeah, we'll take all of the PPE. But there are approved suppliers and agreements and all these things in place that could just screw the government for years to come if they are broken or breached. So it's quite an interesting time in that sense as well. But I think in terms of data and tech and digital identity, again, I'd agree with you. Like you almost feel a private company or a bank or something are more likely to turn something off, right?
Right.
They can be the Lucius Fox typing in the password and watching it blow up behind him.
Right. There is one aspect there that I think is going completely under the radar, and that is the world of advertising. Right. Right. The world of advertising has been incredibly innovative about getting around privacy blockers, whether it's ad blockers
it's a fascinating
like it's a constant innovation war between advertising companies and technology companies to stop them getting the data they want. And what's interesting is we're all at home spending more and more time online, right? Mm-hmm. So I can't not imagine the fact that all this additional data is somehow helping advertising companies better profile, because all the world's activity is being channeled through one platform. I mean, who's advertising on billboards? No one's seeing them. Who's advertising on TV? Okay, yes, that's a pretty popular thing to advertise on. But again, lots of the content is actually on YouTube. It's actually on social media where people are staying in touch. So those activities are actually happening through a laptop, through a phone, rather than the typical TV. The TV is just a watching platform. You can't learn anything about someone from it other than the shows they watch. Whereas your laptop, who you're talking to, which websites you're visiting, what kind of transactions are you making? Everything is being forced through this funnel, and this funnel is going to build an understanding and capability that I think will be quite dangerous once we come out of this sort of cycle. So I'm really hoping that everyone ramps up their digital savviness, as it were, and starts to really get to grips. As we're all online, everyone spends a bit more time being savvy about privacy. I'm really hoping more people are using VPNs, they're using ad blockers and trackers, very basic techniques to stop their privacy being invaded.
Or maybe they're not, right?
I said I hope. I didn't say they are.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that the tech literacy definitely, hopefully, will be increasing over this time because people are more realizing like the dangers of online and the sort of things they're having to go through.
Right.
You know, they're spending more and more time in front of screens, right? So, like, I mean, after work, I always end up sitting in the garden reading for a bit just to get away from screens that I'm around all day. But yeah, it's a interesting time. I think that's a good place to leave it, right? Because I think.
Right. Yeah. I agree.
Well, that's 3 Corona related things on the trot. But I think, you know, similar to, I guess, Brexit, where we won't stop talking about it. This is something that we can always refer to. And I mean, I joked early on that this would be a fantastic exam question to be in the future about sort of exogenous shocks on an economics exam.
Right.
But yeah,
it's a very interesting kind of little, lots of theories and games being played out in real life here at the same time.
Exactly. So it's quite fascinating. But yeah, just to the listeners, like, do send us in like topics you do want us to cover. Like we said, we've got a couple of things in our back pocket to talk about in the coming weeks. But do reach out and let us know what you're interested in hearing us talk about, or if there is anything in particular that you've seen or heard that you'd like myself or Tim to debate.
Perfect.
And I'm just going to finish on a shout out. So if you haven't checked this out already, Tim's done a bunch of a bunch of great work that's started off with sketch notes. So if you haven't checked this out already, sketchnoting is a great technique, and Tim spent his your staycation last
Literally
week learning how to
5
do
days.
this.
Yeah, it was good fun. I have to say it was more of a creative journey than it was like me trying to do something as a piece of work. But it was really, really good fun, and I'm just really warmed by the reception. People have really enjoyed the video, so yeah.
And more to come, I hope.
For the mention. This is the pressure now. Like, I need to try and make sure I'm not Lauryn Hill with a one-hit wonder of an album or something like that.
Of all the one-hit wonders you could have gone for.
Well, that's the thing. Lauryn Hill had such a great voice, right? Had such a great Fugees album, and then her own album was Miseducation of Lauryn Hill is probably one of the greatest albums of all time, right? And then nothing has ever come since.
Oh, wow. What a note to end on.
If you disagree, if you think Lauryn Hill has had other hits, let me know. But honestly, it's no. So anyway, no, I've got lots of pressures to follow up that one video. I've had literally countless messages on that topic as well. So I think every message has ended. I'm looking forward to see what you do next. I'm just going to put all those messages in the drawer and carry on as I was, basically, and just set out to do what I aim to do, which is just try and make Tableau easier to understand. So yeah. No, that's what we'll do. Yeah.
Excellent, cool. So I think that's a great place to leave it. Everyone, take care. Let us know your thoughts at DatumPod on Twitter and datumpodcast.com as well. So yeah, until we speak to you next, take it easy.
All right, take it easy. Catch you in the next one.